trend, right?
Yeah, at least it's new for us.
Right.
Some people, I think, make a living doing this.
Yeah, the people who do are called futurists.
Mm-hmm. I think. And why are you interested in the future, Ralph?
Well, because whether I like it or not, that's where I'm going to spend the rest of my life.
Yes, indeed. I think Josh Billings said that best. Yogi Berra had some things to say about predicting the future.
Okay,
He says it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
I'll believe that. Yeah.
But we're
Now,
going to try something a little bit different. We're going to try and look ahead 26 years into the year 2050 to see what psychology is going to be like.
okay, now, one of the things in terms of hard goods that we know is that many people are saying that by 2050, everything mobile will be run by electricity, cars, motorcycles, buses, etc., etc. So that's, I don't know if I would say easy or easier, but it's certainly usually easier to predict physical things.
Okay. Well, in our case, we're going to try and predict psychological things.
Yeah,
What is psychology going to look like 26 years from now?
well, you know, the human mind has always been kind of a dark swamp at times. And
sometimes darker than others.
yeah, so, you know, you say, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could get to the point where we know everything about how human beings operate?
Mm-hmm.
2050, I don't think we're going to be that advanced, but we will be, I hope, much more advanced.
Yeah. You know, we have to look at, like at the last 100 years, we've really rolled back a lot of stuff in the area of psychology so that stuff that was pretty much, fantasy and smoke and mirrors has now been kind of done away with, and we have, much more precise tools for helping us to understand and predict and control emotions, thoughts, and behavior.
Yeah, and you know, if we go back not to 1900, but we go back to 1600, at that point, people who didn't function very well in society got thrown into what they called bedlams, and for a penny, you could tour Bedlam and see people locked up for
Unusual behavior.
unusual behaviors.
Right. Yeah, well,
we've come a long way from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what kinds of things might we think about for the years ahead? Well, one of the things that I'm thinking about is therapy and technology.
Okay.
I think with the pandemic, we learned that we could bring therapy out of our offices and bring it into the wider world. I could be doing therapy with people 100 miles away.
Yeah, and telehealth, whether it's physical health or mental health, made great strides in only those 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Sheila is working with a family actually, over in Portugal. No, she's not in Portugal. She's here in Mount Pleasant, but the family's in Portugal. And there's a mom, a dad, and 2 kids. And they can't get any services over there that they need.
Okay.
So,
are they looking for like family services or particular individuals within the family?
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Everybody needs something.
Okay.
Yep.
And so when you can do that and reach out, I mean, certainly not the whole globe away, but half a globe away, and say, I can see you, I can speak to you, and you can speak to me,
Mm-hmm.
and we can talk about problems and solutions. that's a different universe than it was even 15 years ago.
Yeah, or even 5 years ago. I think what another thing I'm looking to the future is seeing much more of an integration between psychology and the neurosciences. We've learned a lot more about brain in the last few years than we have in the preceding, 100 years, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that some of our regular listeners will maybe remember is the talk that we had with some of Jim's students who were working on their doctorate,
Mia and Kristen, yeah.
Mia and Kristen, who basically talked about glia and the new things that we're finding out about it. Well, for years and years, it was just thought of as, oh, yeah, this is the soft tissue, the glue that holds the neurons in place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out to be a lot more than that.
Yeah. So as we get into the brain and understand the brain, we go from just understanding the parts of the brain that handle information, and we now begin to see how the brain handles information. And then if we have, well, one of the things that Mia and Kristen were talking about is that, what if you had a brain that wasn't handling information very well? They're working on ways of correcting brain functioning. So I think that'll be,
Yeah,
it'd be nice not to have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's.
yeah,
Those would be great.
those would be great. And the other thing is things like MS.
Yeah.
Which is basically, it turns out, a long-term death sentence. You can live 25 years. Now, 15 years ago, they said, well, you'll live 15 years.
Yeah.
Now they're saying, well, you'll live 25 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, and earlier than you might have, if you have a diagnosis of MS, you're going to die sooner than otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're at the cusp of being able to say, we know what this is neurologically. Now we're getting to the point where we can say the second part, and we can fix it.
Yeah, that's something I think is going to be big 26 years from now in 2050. I'm going to call it precision psychology. So that we can, just like in medicine, you can target specific syndromes, as you were saying, with MS. I think we're going to be able to target specifically syndromes in psychology. We'll, I mentioned therapies before. We'll have a therapy perhaps that is specific to various kinds of addiction, probably a behavioral cognitive approach.
Okay.
We might have some sort of a psychology that is particularly focused at, say, attention deficit hyperactive disorders.
Okay, and then, for example, there are several kinds of PTSD. Now, this standard stereotype is a war veteran who comes back with PTSD. But we also know there's complex PTSD, which is a little more nuanced. And there's also PTSD that comes from childhood trauma. And probably all of those today are treated very similarly in terms of treatment modalities, but they may demand very different treatments, and we'll know more about that over the course of the next 20 years or so, hopefully the next few years.
Uh-huh. Something that I see looming on the horizon, and I guess I've seen it for most of my professional life, and it hasn't really come into its own yet, but I'm visualizing preventative mental health treatments.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned PTSD is related to childhood, adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
Well, how can we prevent that? Well, if we did education and parent training, But you need a driver's license to drive a car, right?
Right,
You need a gun license to own a firearm, right?
right.
What kind of license do you need, create a kid?
None.
Right.
You need the ability or the inability to walk into the drugstore and say, "I need something to prevent pregnancy."
Okay. Now, I'm not advocating a license to have children, but I am advocating much more, um, maybe premarital um, education
Yeah,
on how to bring up a kid.
that I think makes perfect sense to me. Like one of the things that one of the local high schools here were doing, and I was involved on the periphery of it with one of the students who at the time was the daughter of a friend of mine. Well, she's still a daughter of a friend of mine, but she's now married and has a kid of her own. But they gave her in this uh, uh, training for marriage kind of thing, they gave her an egg.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just an ordinary chicken egg, not hard boiled or anything, just.
Uh-huh.
And they said, okay, it's your job. This egg has to come with you everywhere you go,
Okay.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And if you can turn it in at the end of 2 weeks, and honestly say you have gone everywhere that you had to go over the last 2 weeks, sporting events,
And you've taken your
classes,
egg with
and
you.
you've taken your egg
Okay.
with you and it has remained unbroken, you get a pass
Okay.
for this section of the course. Now, you say, well, an egg, what the hell? I could do that. You
Mm-hmm.
put it in your shirt pocket. Yeah, right. And then you're walking along the sidewalk and somebody bumps you and you trip into a tree and hit it on your shirt pocket and
Bye bye egg.
bye bye egg.
Dear, yeah. And let's face it, Ralph, raising a kid is a lot more difficult
Yeah.
than protecting your egg for 2 weeks.
And
Yeah.
the thing is that eggs don't talk back,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens to your temper when you're the person who says, I will be obeyed, and your kid says,
Oh, well, you know that. We've gone through that before.
yeah.
So, um, so preventative mental health strategies, I think, are going to be huge. Another thing that I think will be huge, and we saw it a little bit when I talked about Sheila having clients in Portugal, that we
Right.
might see more global interventions. That is, I can talk with. Well, the other day we talked with Tosin
Yeah,
in Toronto.
in Toronto.
She's interested in doing podcasts, and so we talked about how she would set it up, how she would do it. She's got contacts all over the place. Now she's got contacts with us, and
Yeah.
and we, we can talk to Tosin. She'll be on one of these podcasts, and she'll give her ideas to you folks, and we'll give our ideas to she and her group over in Cameroon and
Nigeria.
and Australia, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the interesting things is that many of people who are not maybe went to university or community college and or are going there now. But as undergraduates, you don't really see the silo culture of the university. And by silo, I mean everybody's in their ivory tower of whatever discipline they have, and they never talk to each other.
Right.
So the poli-sci people don't talk to the psychologists, who don't talk to the neuroscientists, who don't talk to the uh, business people.
Yeah.
And so you end up with all of these skills that are not readily transferable,
Right.
or a knowledge base that's not readily transferable. And I think that's going to change.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too, so that we would have more interdisciplinary collaboration.
Now, one of the things I think that is going to facilitate that is not so much a change in the university cultures per se, but the integration of AI,
Mm.
where we can say to AI, uh, look at these 6 disciplines for commonality
Uh-huh.
and report back to me. And you get a report that says, the sociologists think this, but the psychologists think that, but the poli-sci people think blah, blah, blah.
And the philosophers think something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you end up gathering together and integrating uh, uh, a knowledge that you didn't have the opportunity to do before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There are a couple others things that I'd like to see, and that is let's see, yesterday was Earth Day.
Right.
Okay. I'm not sure how old Earth Day is. I think
Goes back to the 70s,
I think it's the
60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I planted a tree on the first Earth Day.
Okay.
We had a live Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
Planted the Christmas tree. Last time I was in New Jersey to see the tree, it was pretty huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was probably 68 or 69. Probably the first Earth Day. But the point I'm making is that we become more aware of our environment. And
Yeah.
of course, scientists who talk about climate change have really ramped it up and made us quite aware of perhaps the frailty of the environment that we live in. So I would like to see psychology take a more active role in figuring out, how we continue to live on this mortal coil.
Yeah. And there are things. Diary of a Small Planet, the population bomb, and so on, which have proven that not all futurists are 100% correct.
Right. Right.
But in this case, the the conventional wisdom, I think, is true that the global temperature is rising. Now, what can we do to change that?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that probably would be a big one is to convince China and India to stop burning coal.
Mm-hmm.
But China and India both say, and with some justification, look, you guys in the West had it good. You burned coal for 100 years, free, nobody was concerned with climate change. Give us our chance. We want to be a developed country too.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, that gets us into psychology, getting into like global politics, or even into things like conflict resolution, and I think we know how to do this. We've kept our skills in a lab. We talk to other psychologists about it. When was the last time you talked to a diplomat who has to negotiate in Ukraine?
The closest I ever came to talking to anybody who had diplomatic chops was sitting in the rocking chair that John Kennedy sat in 10 years earlier.
Okay. So, that's. I think we might not be able to convince China and India to give up coal.
Coal.
But we can look at things a little bit differently. Let's see. Is it good, Ralph, to keep slaves?
I don't think so.
Okay, I mean we've done a thing on slavery, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we've convinced people, hopefully, that human trafficking is not a good idea. Well, to say not a good idea, it's an immoral idea.
yeah,
Well, throwing plastic away, for example.
yeah,
You got that. Is it called a Sargassum?
yeah,
That's a
and
huge plastic floating
yeah,
island, right?
yeah. Well, there's the Sargasso sea in the Caribbean, which is basically plants.
Yeah,
But now there's one in the Pacific that's floating plastic,
yeah.
and the currents basically take it to a place. There's kind of two circular currents, and they bring it there, and then it just stays there.
It stays there, and it gets bigger.
It gets bigger, and then we have the issue of microplastics that we put everything in plastic containers, and some of it too small to see without a microscope kind of spalls off, and then we eat or drink what was ever in the container, and the next thing you know, we've got microplastic in our circulation system.
Mm-hmm.
Probably psychologists and business could get together and say, this is not a good thing for business to be doing, to be harming human beings. You will, if you can say our packaging does not have any microplastic residue, even though you sell it for a higher price point, if you could assure the public that that's true, you'd probably increase your sales.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's right. Sheila right now is in the process of buying seeds for planting, and she's really going after heirloom seeds and non-GMO seeds. She's paying more money for them.
Right.
But they're cleaner seeds.
Yeah, and people will do that. People will say, I want to buy things that are not going to harm my health.
Mm-hmm. So we had a few things here, Ralph, as we look ahead to 2050. Focused psychology, technology helping out treatment, more of a global perspective. AI is going to be helping us here a little bit.
Neuroscience is going to be continuing to investigate the bioelectric operation of the brain.
Mm-hmm. And I think in a good way to end this, Ralph, in terms of we started with a quote of
I'm going to live in the future whether I like it or not.
Right. And it's forget that. Someone once said the best way to predict the future is to create it.
Let's create a best future for ourselves.
So until the next time, this is Jim
and Ralph
saying keep your stick on the ice
because we're all in this together.